Some days I really have a hard time coming up with ideas for what I want to do for the intro to this YouTube series. And some days I have a brand new kitten. Look at her. She's so cute. Look at this kitty. She's all wiggly and floppy because I just woke her up. Her name is Swabby. She's adorable. I think she would like to go to sleep again. I'm going to let her go do that. Let's start the video. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player and so on. I don't know. I'm still kind of workshopping that intro tagline thing. Anyway, my name is Devilor, and there's a lot to talk about with World of Warcraft right now, especially with Plunderstorm coming out, which I'm super excited about. I'm going to be playing it, and I'll probably be streaming it pretty much all day on Tuesday when this video should be releasing. So go head over to my Twitch channel and check that out if you want to see some Plunderstorm action. But that's not what I want to talk about today. We'll be talking about that probably next week. Today, I want to revisit the idea of World of Warcraft banning or removing functionality from add-ons inside, especially from the perspective of high-end rating. Now, I did talk about this topic a fair bit back when I was doing In Search of Answers almost a year ago now, but A, it's been a while and it's worth revisiting topics from time to time. B, when I did it as part of In Search of Answers, it was kind of, jumbled in with a bunch of other topics. So I thought it would be good to put together a cohesive video talking about the subject. And C, there's actually been some new wrinkles in this whole discussion recently that make it somewhat relevant to talk about now. Specifically, Ian Hazzikostas did an interview with PC Gamer about a month ago from the time that this video is releasing, in which he was talking about, well, a number of things, talking about the new Undermine raid and some of the stuff that's going to be going on in the Undermine patch, but also was talking about, basically through the lens of player feedback, the idea that add-ons can make a fight like quote unquote boring if they're doing too much of the gameplay for you, or conversely, they can make a fight too complicated if they design things around those add-ons being in place and you don't want to use them. You're somebody who does not have those add-ons and they've designed it as though you do. And this is a very real and very challenging issue for encounter designers. Like, it puts them in a genuinely tough spot. Do you assume that players are going to be using these add-ons, which many of the top-end raiders, like, you can assume every top-end raider is going to be using add-ons, and then a lot of everyone else will then be using them as well as a result, because, it's an advantage. They want to take as many advantages as they can toward being able to complete encounters. So do you start from the perspective of assuming that people have these add-ons, which then leaves the people who don't have them kind of in the dust and makes the fight unnecessarily difficult for them, because they're basically, now their game just isn't telling them the same amount of information that the other raiders are getting? Or do you assume that no one has add-ons, and then by having add-ons, now all the fights are boring and easy because this other functionality that's there makes it way too easy for you to be able to do stuff? And there's a quote from Ian in this article that I want to really hone in on, because I think what he's saying here is very important. He says, I think it's an area where we'll likely want to start clawing back some functionality, as long as we can make sure that our baseline game experience is offering players the information they need to have an engaging, elegant time. And I'm going to come back to two specific things that he mentioned there a little bit later in the video. I just wanted to get that quote out there and just plant that in your head as we continue the discussion, because that concept, the idea of clawing back some functionality as long as the game itself is able to provide the information that you need, is kind of the core of this whole issue. And just to be clear, this whole discussion of should WoW allow add-ons, or what should add-ons be allowed to do inside World of Warcraft, this has been an argument longer than people have been playing World of Warcraft. Like, this started back in the closed beta, when they first started having the first add-on APIs available for people to be able to create things with. Before World of Warcraft released, people were already arguing about whether or not it should have add-ons and what those add-ons should be able to do. So this has been going on for a long time. And the reality is, it is a much more nuanced and complex topic than most of the people who are arguing about this on the internet really give it credit for. Like, anywhere you see a discussion about this, whether it's, a forum thread, something on social media, comment section in a video, like, you could probably scroll down the page a bit on YouTube and you'll see a bunch of this sort of discussion. you'll see a lot of people who just have like one sentence takes that's just like, well, just get rid of add-ons or whatever else. I'm gonna kind of lightning around my way through some of the more popular like single sentence responses to this sort of thing and explain why it's really just not paying attention to the broader impact of a lot of what's being suggested usually with these arguments. For starters, a lot of times you'll see people say add-ons are fine. If you don't want to use add-ons, then just don't use add-ons. Sure, yeah, that's great. Like that's very unrealistic to expect from people. First of all, uh, if the game is designed around you having the add-ons in place, this is essentially telling people, well, if you don't want to use add-ons, just make the game way harder on yourself for no good reason. Like that's not realistic. And secondarily, World of Warcraft, like any MMORPG, is a social game. It is a game, especially at the top and upper levels of gameplay, but all the like that trickles all the way through what everyone is doing. If you are engaging in gameplay and you're especially going in to do PvE content with a group of other people, they're going to expect you to have these add-ons there. They're going to expect you to be doing this stuff. You literally have to find a cluster and group of people that have all collectively agreed we do not use add-ons. And even then, like trying to come to that distinction, because which add-ons are allowed, which add-ons aren't. Is it literally no add-ons? Like if I have an add-on that organizes my inventory, that organizes my bags, is Bagnon allowed? Like, is that okay? Is Addy Bags or whatever the new one is called, is that allowed? If I have something that makes my unit frames look a little bit different, is that allowed? Like, there's a whole bunch of nuance, even just in trying to put that together, that just saying, just don't use add-ons if you don't want to, you're glossing over a ton of the social impact of such a choice. Another common argument is make the game less complicated, and then these add-ons won't be needed because you won't need them to keep track of everything that's going on. And I understand the core of this argument, but I think it's slightly misunderstanding and misinterpreting what players are going to do, even in a case where they don't necessarily need something to be able to function. Because the important thing to understand about a need inside of an MMORPG, inside of a game where everything is based around completing more difficult content or completing content in order to be able to advance your character and become more powerful, is that the term makes things easier for me or makes me more likely to succeed and need are basically the same thing. If it gives you any sort of advantage or any sort of leg up whatsoever, that is considered something that people need. Like, this goes all the way back down to the basic understanding of like gear drops. Like, I need that trinket. Like, well, do you need the trinket to keep playing? No, you technically don't. You can continue logging into World of Warcraft if you don't have this trinket, but it will make your character more powerful. So therefore you feel as though you need that trinket. The same exact logic applies to utilizing add-ons for many players, not for everyone, obviously, but for many players, where if they see an add-on and they believe that using that add-on is going to allow them to complete more difficult content or get better rewards in the video game, then they will feel as though they need that add-on because it gives them an advantage and therefore it becomes necessary. I know I said I was going to lightning round these things, but I'm going to violate that immediately by going off on a tangent and tell you guys about my experiences as a Retribution Paladin at the end of Wrath of the Lich King. Now, anyone who played a Ret Paladin back then remembers that Ret was that was the most face roll that face roll spec has ever been. Like, the end of Wrath of the Lich King, Retribution was basically, I'll put it into numbers. It was actually mathematically, like, it was mathed out at the time. There was theory crafted out at the time that as long as you were pushing buttons, right? As long as you didn't AFK and you were pushing buttons, the difference between the absolute best and most ideal ability usage and the absolute worst, like, you pushed every button wrong whenever there was a possibility to push the wrong button, that's what you did, was like 200 DPS at a time where you were doing like 2,000 to 2,300 from memory. Like, it was around 10% of a difference. And 10% isn't nothing, but for every other class, that was more like 40 to 50%. Like, it was a much bigger difference. Whereas Ret, you could kind of do everything, and the fluctuality in you could do anything, I should say, and the fluctuality in your DPS was not that big of a deal. Now, despite the fact that it almost didn't matter what button you were pushing when, there was still an add-on, because weak auras hadn't really taken off yet at the time. There was still an add-on that all it did was tell you as a Ret Paladin what button you should push next. It would just pop up with the icon of whatever the best button for you to be pushing right now was. And it would do that just by scanning what was on cooldown, when things were coming off of cooldown. It would just show the icon and say, push this button, and you'd push that button and you move on to the next one. Now, I used that add-on for quite a while towards the end of Wrath of the Lich King. And it wasn't because I needed help with the rotation. Like, I could do the rotation just fine by myself. I didn't have a problem knowing which button needed to be pushed next. And B, it didn't matter what button I was pushing anyway, because Retribution, it just literally didn't matter what you were doing as long as you were pushing buttons. That's all it really came down to. But I still used that add-on because I found that having that do that tiny slice of my thinking for me allowed me to focus on other things that were going on, especially as a raid leader at the time. Having that there so that I just didn't have to think about which button I needed to push next. I didn't have to think like, oh, both Exorcism and Divine Storm are off of cooldown. Which one should I push? Just not even having to have that thought because it was displaying on my screen for me already. That allowed me to focus on other things a little bit more. So that way I could pay more attention to things like my positioning, pay more attention to things like boss timers, pay more attention to things like who is dead and needs a battle res, that sort of thing. Just removing that tiny, even though it was not that much thinking and it was not something that I needed to be able to do the Retribution rotation, having that add-on there to help with that tiny little thing gave me the slightest bit of an advantage over not having it. And that is the mindset of not just me. That is many players who will make those sorts of decisions just because every little bit helps. I don't even know if I breathed through that entire rant. I'm apparently on one today, but we're going to keep going. The next sort of common topic the common argument that I want to bring up that people will always say in discussions like this is, well, just only delete the ones that play the game for you. You see a lot of the term combat add-ons comes up a lot where people say, well, I don't mind the cosmetic add-ons. I don't mind things that just change how things look. I only want them to delete the add-ons that do the thinking for me. And that's a great concept. Again, if that's how it worked, that would be great. I would be fully in support of, yeah, just get rid of the add-ons that do the thinking for you and let me still have the add-ons that change how my UI looks and help me, like, not just reposition things, but make things look different or present information in different ways on the screen so it's more usable and more digestible by myself, even though it's the same information that's being given to me anyway by the default UI. The problem is that those two add-ons are the same thing. The problem is that most of these add-ons are doing, at least today, we're going to talk about an add-on in a minute that definitely went way across the line, but you can't do it anymore. All these add-ons are doing today is presenting information. They are taking the information that the game is giving you. They are then thinking about that and presenting information to you differently. It is impossible for an add-on to actually play the game for you these days. Like, you still have to push the buttons. It'll do all the thinking for you. It'll make playing the game very easy, but it's not like the weak auras aren't playing the game for you. They're making the decisions for you so that then you don't have to think about what you're doing when you're playing the game. It's a very important distinction between those that isn't just semantics, because again, all they're doing is taking information that the game is presenting and putting it together in such a way that it helps you make the decisions that you need, or in some cases even makes those decisions for you. I'm going to go into one example of that a little bit later on in the video to explain more about exactly what I'm talking about there. Another common argument is, well, just put all that functionality in the game itself. And this is something that Blizzard has done a lot of times in the past. I think my biggest caveat / caution with this is the way that Blizzard puts that look at two people's customized UIs, right? Look at, unless you're literally just using LUI out of the box exactly as it came and you haven't changed any settings, everyone has things set up differently. Everyone has things put in different places. Everyone's personal weak auras that they're using for cooldown tracking and stuff. Again, unless you're using someone's pre-done package, which again, there's several of those to choose from. They're all different. Everyone wants the information presented to them in different ways. In the cases in the past where Blizzard has taken that information and taken those add-ons and put them into the game, they've always done it in a very simplified fashion. And there's a lot of reasons why they do it that way. There's a lot of advantages for them to, and just for the general player base as well, for them to take the add-on and then not necessarily put all of the functionality of said add-on in the game. They will just make it like a much more easily digestible and something that everyone can figure out how to customize. But the end result is you kind of can't do a lot of what you can do with the add-on that you can do with the stuff in the base game. prime example of this, and one that I'm probably going to bring up a couple times through this video, is the like in-game, I forget what they call them, it's not called the power auras, but the things that pop up on your screen by default when a proc happens or whatever. Like when you have a lava burst proc as an elemental shaman, the stuff that pops up on the screen. I forget the official Blizzard term for those, but when they took at the time power auras and put that into the game, because it was becoming apparent that having these alerts that pop up when you have an important proc or whatever was becoming mandatory for people to be able to enjoy playing whatever class it was they were playing. That's something that they took and they put into the game. It's not something that I think they've done particularly well with. Again, I'm going to go into this a little bit more in a little bit more details when we get to a later part of the video, but there is a lot to be said about, I got this add-on, I installed it, I set it up myself, and now I have stuff where I know where it is because I put it there, as opposed to, I don't know what this weird blue swoosh is across the top of my screen. It must be some talent or something I picked because it wasn't there before, but I just changed my talent build entirely and I don't know what this even is. Like there's definitely a big difference there. I do think that this is probably the most compelling of all the like standard copy pasta style arguments that I see around add-ons being adjusted or removed or whatever else inside World of Warcraft. I think a lot of what Blizzard does need to do is figure out why these add-ons are considered necessary and then take what part of functionality from those add-ons they can safely do and add that into the base game. But again, we're going to come back to that a little bit later in the video. I will say that one argument I don't see super often, but is very important, is accessibility concerns. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that there are many World of Warcraft players for whom, if add-ons were just removed, would no longer be able to play World of Warcraft. Full stop. I know like it's somewhat of an anomaly inside the MMO gaming space and just gaming space in general that World of Warcraft has the ability for someone to say, okay, I have a friend who is blind. I'm going to help create an add-on for them so that they can play this game even though they are blind. And I've watched streamers back when I was doing full-time influencer management for World of Warcraft. I watched streamers who were blind. And they had a stream set up and everything, and they were streaming. They were playing like there was one in particular I was watching. I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head right now. I would have looked it up before the video if I'd thought I was going to even be talking about this. But I'm on a ramble today, chat. So I'm calling you chat now. Jeez, I spend way too much time. I've gone full content creator, haven't I, chat? I called you chat again. Attempting to meander my way back to the point. There was a content creator whose name, again, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were legally blind. They could not see very, like for them, there's the way they described it. If I'm remembering correctly, it was like a big smudge. They couldn't make out anything in particular. They weren't like no vision, but the vision they had was not something that you could consider useful in any sense. And they had, as a result, a bunch of weak auras setups that would just announce audio and through an audio orally, I guess is the, like not orally with the mouth, like orally through the, anyway, they would do a bunch of audio alerts based on what was going on that would say like, okay, and it was very fast speech. And this is actually fairly common for the vision impaired, is that they will have a something that just reads words at them very fast, and they're able to interpret and process that information much faster than most people can, because it's something that they've become more accustomed to. It's almost a skill that they develop, in a sense, being able to process this like quick string of text very quickly. So this guy was doing arenas, and it would say like 10% health raid arena 3 or something like that, like just really fast. Like I couldn't even understand the words half the time, but he would hear them and he would know what it said, so that he knew who needed healing or who needed a cooldown or whatever inside of his arena group. And he was playing very well. It was super, super impressive. That sort of thing could not exist without add-ons being available. So it's important to remember that if your stance is, I don't think add-ons should exist, full stop, you're kind of at the same time saying, I don't think people like that should be able to play World of Warcraft. And that doesn't really sit right with me personally. Now, obviously, there's a lot that Blizzard could do to bake that sort of functionality back into World of Warcraft by default. I'm not trying to come at you and say that, oh, if you don't like add-ons, then you hate blind people or whatever. That is not the point I'm trying to say. Please don't take me that direction. All I'm really saying is that the current accessibility impact to Blizzard saying, okay, no more. It's hello, everyone. Here's this new patch. No more add-ons. If that didn't come packaged with a ton of accessibility features alongside it, would mean that a lot of players who enjoy World of Warcraft, and it's one of the only games that they can enjoy like this because of the way that add-ons work, would no longer be able to enjoy the video game. And that's a big deal that I don't think gets talked about enough inside the confines of this whole discussion around add-ons. And at the same time, it's super fair to say, accessibility concerns aside, it is super fair to say that there are lots of MMORPGs that are very successful and don't allow add-ons. Like, the whole time I've been talking, I'm sure there's somebody who's been like, well, Final Fantasy 14 doesn't have add-ons, and that game does fine. Like, yes, it clearly does. It's a very successful MMO that does not allow add-ons. In fact, last I knew for Final Fantasy 14, there was like this, I remember there being a discussion about this like third-party damage meter you could use, but you were likely to get banned from the video game for using it. So people were like, well, it's risky. You can use it if you really want to see DPS meters, but if you do it, you might get banned. So like that's the extent and the length to which Square Enix goes with Final Fantasy 14 to have a very, very hard, like, no, there are no add-ons for this video game, sort of approach. And that can certainly work. Again, accessibility issues aside, that can certainly work. I don't know that you can't just say that is the fix for World of Warcraft though, like as though removing all add-ons today doesn't then come with a ton of extra work to then make the video game be functional in a way that it can work without add-ons. Final Fantasy 14 is a game that has been built over the last however many years it's been available without add-ons existing. So everything is built without even having to think about any of that. And it's not a problem. If you were to take add-ons, if you were to take DBM, bigwigs, weak auras, whatever, out of World of Warcraft right now, you would lose a ton of, like, again, without major game sweeping changes otherwise, you would lose a lot of the player base because the game would just suddenly become way harder than it probably should be. And this is why I think what Ian said in the way that he said it, because I know Ian fairly well, and the guy, he really thinks very, very specifically about exactly what he says and how he says things. This is why I think what he said and the way he said it is very, very important, because he didn't say any of the stuff that I just went into, right? He didn't, from what he was saying, none of what I just said was none of the arguments I just gave were any part of what he was talking about. All he said was, once again, I think it's an area where we'll likely want to start clawing back some functionality as long as we can make sure that our baseline game experience is offering players the information they need. That's what Ian said. And I'm going to start with the first of the two very important points in that sentence that I think, by the way, there was other things that Ian said in the article. Please go read it to get the full context. Don't be the guy who just hears one single quote and then blows an entire thing out of proportion as a result because you didn't bother looking into the rest of the context available for it. That's social media in a nutshell in 2025. Let's try to be better than that. But anyway, the first of the two things that I want to hit on here is specifically the phrasing around clawing back functionality, because to me, that means not removing functionality necessarily. The term clawing back generally means, I mean, you can sort of get the mental image for it. It's like reaching forward and grabbing something and just kind of sliding it a little bit back towards yourself, but you're not taking everything, and you're not necessarily like completely removing it from the situation. You're being careful, you're being precise, you're going in and you're targeting specific things that specific changes that can be made. And this is something that they've done many times before throughout the entire history of World of Warcraft, going all the way back to vanilla, where they find things, okay, there's some add-on functionality that's happening that we don't want to be the norm anymore. So let's find some way that we can break this without breaking too much else in the process. Lots of people can, like in recent memory, thinking back to Shadowlands, I remember there being a whole thing with like nameplates that resulted in a whole bunch of nameplate add-ons having to be kind of rewritten because Blizzard adjusted how nameplates were working inside the API. You can think back even further to things like AVR back in the Wrath of the Lich King days, going through Icecrown Citadel. That was the one that would show like inside the game world, like actually do like an almost like virtual reality thing, augmented reality thing on top of your game screen that would show like where to go stand and stuff like that inside the game world much more directly. Even all the way back to, you might remember all the way back in original vanilla, there was an add-on called Decursive it wasn't as big of a deal for Alliance because of the way Paladins work, but for Horde, it was huge because it meant that you sat there and you just hit this decursive button over and over and over again. And it would allow you to cleanse anybody in your raid that needed cleansing for whatever it was you were able to cleanse. And it checked to see what debuff they had, and then it cast the appropriate spell on them. And there's another one that I remember. I'm going to go on a tangent again here, but does anyone else remember RDX? Like way back in the day. It eventually just kind of became another like UI takeover add-on after all the changes that happened with the Burning Crusade pre-patch. But way back in the day, RDX was it was an add-on that it required you to pay for it in order to get access to it, or know somebody who had paid for it, because let's face it, at the end of the day, it's just digital files. People were sharing this thing all over the place, and technically paying for an add-on was against terms of service anyway, so it was kind of whatever. But anyway, there was this add-on called RDX, and it was super far ahead of its time in terms of what it was capable of. These were back in the days where healing add-ons and raid frame add-ons would have things like emergency monitors that would show like, oh, this person is the lowest on health and they're on the top of the list. You can click on them and you can target them. So then you can cast a spell. RDX was doing things that were way beyond what anybody else was doing at the time, where it would have the thing like the emergency monitor, but it would also just have like a macro that you could have that you just spam this button. And what it does is look to see what's going on at the time that you press the button inside the raid. You could even have it configured to where it was like, okay, this healer is focused on that tank. This healer is focused on that tank. This healer is focused on the raid in general. And this took a lot of like custom setup to be able to do it, but you could literally have an entire set of healers that were just sitting there pushing this one button, and the add-on was literally making all of your decisions for you. Like, oh, your tank is low on health. Okay, let's flash heal. They're low on health, but not super low on health, and they just took a hit in the last like 10th of a second, so they're probably got a second. Okay, great, or heal instead. Oh, they're mostly topped off, but they're starting to chunk a little bit low. Let's renew. Oh, their weakened soul effect has worn off. Let's put power word shield on them instead. Like, it would do all of that logic, and then also be looking around at everything else that was going on in the raid. Like, oh no, it's this part of this fight, because it also had an encounter plugin. So it would understand what encounters needed to happen. Like, oh, you're fighting Chromagus. Cool. Now, instead of just doing all that healing stuff, we're also going to watch for all the dispels and decurses and so on that you need to be taken care of. And we'll throw that into the mix of everything that you're doing. Like this add-on literally, this add-on literally would play the game for you. Like not the, what I said earlier, where it makes the decisions and you've still got to push the buttons. No, this thing literally would play the game for you. Enough that a bunch of the people who were using it in the very early days ended up getting banned for botting, because it kind of was what it was doing for some people. Like there's a point where the difference between straight up botting and botting by pressing a button repeatedly over and over again is kind of the same thing. So that add-on ended up going away after a while, especially with the changes that happened with the Burning Crusade pre-patch, where they basically removed the ability for add-ons to do any sort of logic that then resulted in directly changing like what spell you're using or who you're targeting it on. That doesn't allow you to do that in combat anymore. Things like that, by the way, is the reason why you can't open the weak auras menu while you're in combat, because there's certain functionality that weak auras has that it can't expose to the user while you're in combat, or else the whole thing breaks. It ends up getting what this is genuinely what it's called. It ends up getting taint. That's genuinely what it's called. If an add-on tries to do any of these sorts of things while you're in combat, it then receives taint. And yeah, no, that it's a funny word. Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand. What Blizzard has done so many times in the past is they have tried to find specific things that they can do to break certain parts of functionality in a way that doesn't make the add-ons that are fine, the ones that nobody cares about, like the cosmetic add-ons, the inventory add-ons, that sort of thing. The stuff where it doesn't matter. Go nuts. Make your unit frames look like it's a bunch of walking Melanias from Elden Ring. I don't care what you're doing. I don't know why that came to mind, but whatever. Make your unit frames look like that. Sure, no one cares. That doesn't affect anything. But oh, this thing over here is telling you exactly how to do this raid encounter and telling you where to go and everything. That's what people are kind of upset about. And I think the important thing, like what's important to remember about that is how do they actually break it? Like, what do they actually do? What can be done? The two sort of main ways, well, let's say three sort of main ways that they've approached this sort of thing in the past has been either A, just removing some sort of functionality that is necessary for this add-on to function, but is kind of not used by anything else. The AVR example I gave earlier is a good example of this sort of approach, where they just removed the ability, in order to break AVR, they removed the ability for add-ons to know which direction your character was facing and what angle, like specific angle your screen was at, because that kind of was only the sort of thing that you needed for add-ons like AVR to exist. So they just removed that. AVR could no longer tell where exactly it needed to render its little weird circles and stuff on the screen to make it look like it was overlaid on the game world. So then that add-on didn't work anymore. That was the approach they did there, was by breaking that tiny bit of functionality, but no longer giving that little bit of data to add-ons, which then in turn made the add-on that they wanted to break no longer work and didn't really affect anything else. Another method that they've done in the past is to make things like protected or bring that taint concept into it. That's what they did for stuff like RDX I was describing earlier, for things like decursive, where you had an add-on that would choose what spell to cast for you and who to cast it on. They made it so that that is technically still something that an add-on can do. Like you can still, like especially for like buff add-ons and stuff like that, you can still have an add-on that will cast spells on people in like outside of combat, and it will go through and buff everyone. You see this a lot in classic things like Pally Power, for example, where Pally Power still works because it will still choose what spells to cast on who inside and outside of combat. But you might notice if you've used Pally Power that it kind of stops working directly the same way that it does otherwise as soon as you're in combat. You can no longer have it automatically cast on individual raid members by just clicking the button for whichever class it is. You now need to actually go over to the side menu and click on the individual person that needs the buff once you're in combat. That's because that action is now considered protected, which means that you can no longer, you can only interact with it in certain ways under certain circumstances, or else it gets the taint. And yes, I will be utilizing that word as much as possible because that's just my maturity level today, apparently. There is one other thing that they've tried in the past, which is this concept of like hidden information. Like this is something that the game is doing that we're just straight up not going to tell the player about or tell the client about. They tried something like this with I forget the name of the encounter off the top of my head right now, but the like Among Us encounter back in Sanctum of Domination, where you had to find the right person in your raid that needed to be attacked and get their health low so that you could continue with them, continue with the encounter. They had tried this sort of like hidden API method to it, where it should have been difficult to tell through add-ons exactly who was the one who in your raid needed to be DPS. And it kind of worked. It also kind of didn't. Ended up being a bunch of loopholes that people were still able to figure out ways to make it work or to make add-ons figure it out for you. Stuff like that could be interesting to try to explore for solutions to issues like this in the future. But I feel like it's going to be very difficult for them to find that balance where A, it's actually hidden, and B, there isn't just some other immediate easy way to figure it out on your own regardless. Like the specific example that I want to talk on here and touch on here, and the one that came up in the PC Gamer article where they were interviewing Ian Hazzikostas about this whole thing in the first place, is the Ovinax encounter from the current raid in the War Within. Basically, on Mythic difficulty, which I haven't done, so if I'm getting any of this wrong, I'm sorry. I have not done Mythic Ovinax. Shocker, I know. But essentially on Mythic difficulty, there's 8 people who get a debuff. You need 2 people to go stand by a specific egg cluster each. There's a specific order that you kind of want to do them in, but you specifically, you need 2 people standing next to each of these egg clusters. And you don't have a long time to be able to sort all of that out. So you need people to collapse on these in a hurry, and it's random who they're all going on. And so there's a lot of like quick thinking that theoretically should have to happen to be able to get the right people onto these egg clusters. Or you can install a weak aura. It will look to see who has the debuff. It will then tell them which cluster to go to stand on, and you just do that at that point. And so the complaint here is kind of obvious, right? Like, it's something that if you actually had to do all of this thinking yourself, it could be a very interesting / difficult part of the encounter where, yes, okay, we have to very, very quickly in a hurry recognize, okay, these people all have the circles underneath them and we need them to go over here and over here, over here. And everyone has to, on the fly, be able to figure out on their own, essentially, because there isn't time to sit there and chat about it, who's going to which egg and so on. Like, this could be a very challenging part of the encounter. But because this weak aura exists, it basically tells you what to do. So you just do what the weak aura says. And this was specifically named as one of the encounters that a lot of people will look at and say, well, it's actually kind of boring because I'm just doing my DPS rotation and then doing what the add-on tells me to do from time to time. The problem is, how do you prevent that? How do you actually stop the add-on from being able to look and see? Because basically all it has to do is know who has the debuffs. That's it. It just needs to know who has the debuffs. That's the entirety of what this weak aura needs from the API in terms of information, is who has the debuffs. And if you then get to the point of saying, like, well, let's just block debuffs from, like, you can't just say block debuffs from add-ons without breaking most add-ons anyway, which, again, going back to earlier topic, I at least think it's pretty straightforward that just delete all add-ons is not a realistic solution to this problem. There's a lot of steps that would need to be taken in advance of that occurring before that could even be considered as an option. So you can't just say don't allow add-ons to know who has debuffs. That doesn't work. And then from there, it literally, all it does is go, okay, these people have these debuffs. It doesn't actually mark the things themselves or anything. You actually have to manually mark, like with the raid markers or whatever, which egg clusters they are. It just says, okay, use these symbols. And then I'm just going to take 2 of these people and say, go to this symbol. 2 of these people say, go to this symbol. 2 of these people say to go to this symbol, and so on. Like, that's literally all it does, is say, you guys go to this one, you guys go to this one, you guys go to that one. It might have, I'm actually not sure of this as I'm talking about it. It might have some sort of like mild optimization that it tries to do for who's closest to which one, but I don't think it actually knows that information. So it's probably just saying everybody get to this one and just like deal with it that way. And 99% of that is literally just basic programming logic, like the sort of thing that if Blizzard tried to break that, then nothing would work. That's, again, getting back to the same problem of just deleting all add-ons as the solution. So how do they remove the ability for an add-on to make the determination for you on where a bunch of people with a debuff should stand without breaking everything in the process? That's pretty difficult. There does exist within the realm of possibility that they could start having, like, quote unquote protected debuffs or something. Like, this is a debuff that if you get this debuff, it's not immediately shared with the player or something like that. I don't know. I genuinely don't know what the solution for this is, because I cannot think of a way to have it so that it cannot tell when you've received a debuff or when you've received a buff, while not also simultaneously breaking everybody's weak auras that tell them, like, when their procs are going off or something. Like, this would be very, very difficult for them to thread the needle on. It is possible they can find a way to hide just that specific debuff, or mark a debuff as one to not be shared with the player under certain circumstances. That seems like at least an idea worth considering, and an attempt worth making to try to figure out how to say, okay, don't tell weak auras about this debuff, but you can tell it about all the other debuffs that they're getting. It's just this one, don't share that information to the player's client, so that, because we don't want them to be able to automate the thinking behind this debuff existing. There's also some questions, just as an aside, there's also some questions to ask here about, like, okay, is this mechanic fun enough to need to want to do it without having something that's doing the thinking for you? Or is it something that was made this complicated because the encounter designer assumed you would have something be doing the thinking for you? That's a whole separate discussion. And like I said, I have not done this encounter on Mythic, so I am not at all qualified to speculate on that one whatsoever. Just something to think about in the process of all of this. But all of this thinking about, like, what information is it actually exposing to the client? What information is it providing to the add-on API for add-ons to then be able to do their thing with? Kind of brings me to the second point that I wanted to sort of hone in on inside of what Ian mentioned in this quote, which was the phrase, make sure that our baseline game experience is offering players the information they need. He's essentially saying here, like, he's recognizing if they do start to pull functionality away from add-ons, they have to do that with, at the same time, in mind, the reality that they may be pulling away some functionality that their player base is relying on to be able to enjoy the video game. There's a lot to unpack about that in particular, because honestly, need is going to be a fairly subjective term in terms of what players are going to want, what information players are going to want accessible to them. There are people for whom, oh, the information I need is just, am I still alive or not, and how much damage am I doing? That's what I want to know. There are players for whom the term need is, I really need to know if the third warlock in my group is about ready to summon a big old demon or not, because then I can slightly optimize how I'm doing this other thing over here or whatever. Like the gap of information and what somebody considers necessary is pretty massive, depending on just who you are, how you like to play, how you like to optimize your character, and so on. So that sort of sense of, it's basically then Blizzard having to be put into the seat of determining what information they feel players need. And that is something to be somewhat like, I think it's fair to be somewhat concerned about that. It's fair to be concerned that they may make decisions that you personally would not have made about what information is considered necessary. This kind of brings me back to that discussion I started earlier about the sort of built-in weak auras, built-in power auras to the game, where there's the graphics that pop up on your screen when some sort of proc happens or whatever. There's a bunch of those in the game. Some of them are decent. Some of them are kind of useless. Like, I remember when I was trying to, after I started playing War Within, I was mostly playing Windwalker on my monk, and I was like, screw it. Let's figure out how to tank so I can get faster Qs. I spec Brewmaster, and there was a bunch of stuff popping up on my screen. I had no idea what any of it actually meant. And it turns out that like half of the like built-in weak auras that pop up for Brewmasters are just not something that I ever really even need to think about. The stuff that I'm actually focusing on, things like the stagger mechanic, things like purifying brew, things like celestial brew, those sorts of things that I'm actually using are more cooldown based, and you don't usually get, with the exception of stagger, you don't usually get much in the way of like a visual indicator on your screen about what's going on with those. So a lot of the things that were popping up were just like, hey, you get a free blackout kick. I'm like, cool. I kind of don't care. That's not the information that I would be most in need of knowing, that I'm going to get a no cooldown blackout kick next. I'd really rather know about all of these other things that are going on. At least just me personally. Expanding on that a fair bit, there's a lot of stuff that is not shown to the player that, like, especially as a tank. Tanking in particular is one where, like, to me as a tank, obviously tanks are much more focused on being able to do DPS these days. So the amount of damage output that your tank is doing is way more important than it has been in the past. But throughout the entire history of tanking in World of Warcraft, it's been important to know, especially like Burning Crusade onward, it's been important to know, like, what are my DPS cooldowns, or sorry, my survivability cooldowns? Are they active? How long are they active for? And what is the remaining cooldown on them? And some of that you can kind of do with action bars by just like positioning them on your screen in places where they're not like way off to the side somewhere. But things like, I need to know if my vampiric blood is still active so that I know if I need to use Icebound Fortitude or not. That's the sort of stuff that as a blood DK, I need to know if those buffs are still active. And currently they all just kind of get lumped into the same big giant wall of icons up in the top right, alongside somebody's Renew and somebody's Renewing Mist and the random other procs that I've got going on. They all kind of get just lumped into that same big section up in the top right of my screen. That's the sort of thing that I would want to see some very significant improvements towards, in terms of how WoW actually presents buffs, debuffs, and so on to the player. And it would need to be something that was done in a very per user customizable sort of sense. Like, let me choose if my vampiric embrace should be up in that giant list, or maybe in a larger, like more important, this is a big important ability that's active on me right now sort of thing. Let me choose what sort of debuffs show up that are things that I need to see, and so on. Like, I think there needs to be some significant player agency in terms of determining which buffs and debuffs are important and which ones are overlaid on the screen and given alerts for. Heck, let me choose from the different graphics that are available when I have a proc, which one that shows up as, does it show up on the left or right? Like, let me customize all of that myself. That would be something that would go a long way toward lessening the need or lowering the need for having these add-ons that actually handle that. And then also would give Blizzard a framework that they can build that then they could later on allow those add-ons to work through that framework, similar to what they did with nameplates, where nameplates is now something that is it's a protected frame essentially inside of the game. So you can customize it, but only in these certain specific ways, and you have to do these specific things with it. And there are some other functionalities that you then can't do with nameplates. You could do the same sort of thing with the like auras and stuff that pop up if they wanted to head in that direction. At the very least, I think that's something they should do for the base game anyway, because let's be honest, the current alerts and the current buff and debuff display in the game is not good. Also, thinking about boss encounters and like add-ons like DBM, bigwigs, and so on, the ones that will pop up the like timer bars on your screen and stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of those, like, I haven't really used a lot of those in a while, and sometimes they're just super unnecessary and sometimes they're super overkill. But there have been many encounters in the past where if I didn't have a timer bar that showed me like when a phase transition was going to occur, especially if it's a timed phase transition, I would end up being super frustrated for various reasons. Like any DPS, I'm thinking back in my rep paladin days again. Any DPS who has ever, any rep paladin who's ever popped wings just in time for the boss to fly away on a timer, and you just stand there with your wings active, being like, great, completely wasted that. Should have held on to it so that I could use it when he lands, but now when he's going to land in another 30 seconds, my wings will have just fallen off and now I can't do damage. That's just a frustrating and annoying situation. And the way that you mitigate that and the way you avoid falling into that trap as a player is have a boss add-on that's got a timer on the screen that says, hey, idiot, it's 3 seconds before the boss is going to take off. Now's a bad time to pop wings. So that you can make that decision. You have the relevant information available to you as a player to make the smart choice to not push wings in that situation. If you don't have that information available, all you can do is basically push it on cooldown. And then on occasion, that means that you're going to push it and the boss is going to fly away. Now, I should once again mention that a lot of the concerns that I have about a like scorched earth, remove all add-ons sort of approach to solving this issue inside of World of Warcraft, or even a more measured approach where they're just clawing back specific functionality. A lot of the concerns I have are things that absolutely could be solved by putting in the additional work to make sure that that concern is taken care of. Like even going back to the accessibility issues, like yes, if they were to just remove these add-ons abilities to do things and do nothing else, there would be a lot of people who could no longer play the video game. They could implement that functionality directly into World of Warcraft for those players so that they are unaffected as a result. And honestly, I believe that's the sort of thing that should be in the game at a baseline level anyway. These are all things that can be done. It's fair to be concerned that those things will not be done or will need additional work or will be kind of like they'll do some sort of stuff towards it, but not quite get as far as it needs to be for me to still enjoy playing X class or Y spec or whatever. Like, here's an example. Without weak auras right now, I would find playing a Demonology Warlock spec into Diabolist super frustrating because I, as someone who plays that class, really want to know when I'm about to summon a new demon and what that demon is going to be so that I can make a decision if I want to delay my Hand of Gul'dan by a second or not. I can make the decision to be like, hold on, actually, we're about to finish clearing this pack, so I'm going to not Hand of Gul'dan yet because I don't want to summon the big Felguard that runs over, or whatever he is, that runs over and does the big AoE slash. Instead, I'm going to just finish off, cast a couple of other spells, and then use the Hand of Gul'dan to open on the next pack so that I get a big burst of AoE damage at the start of that. Without weak auras that tell me that information, it all gets buried in the top of my screen, and I'm not going to know when that stuff is about to happen. Like, realistically, I'm just not going to know. So the concern would be are they going to do all of the work that is necessary to make that not frustrating and to make sure that the gameplay is still enjoyable and that I do actually have the information that I feel that I need, not necessarily just what Blizzard feels that I need, but what I feel that I need in order to be able to enjoy playing the class. I think that's, I'm not trying to sound doom and gloom here, but I think that is a fair concern to have because it does require that, like, testing, iteration, and so on. It requires development time. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about, and I think it's an interesting thing to look forward to. I hope that as they consider making these changes, because I know that some of this stuff is going to happen. Ian would have mentioned it if it wasn't something that they were already working on doing. I hope that this stuff goes onto a PTR with well enough time in advance to be able to get on there, experiment with it a little bit, and understand exactly what nature of changes they're talking about here and exactly what's being done to claw back this sort of functionality, so that we can have a better understanding of where that's going to put us once this PTR becomes live, once this new content update becomes live, and people don't have the rug pulled out from under them. Anyway, that has been quite the ramble today. Thank you all so much for watching. And thank you all so much, by the way, for all the kind comments on the last video that I put out where I was talking about 2025 plans, kind of what I'm thinking about doing with the future of this show. A lot of people had some really, really nice things to say that really like lifted my spirits and made me feel really good about things. So there were a lot of very valid concerns in there as well. And I can just say of all the comments that I read, they were like, I understand here, but this is what I'm concerned about. All of those, I agreed with the concern, and that's not what I want to do. Like the people who were concerned that I was going to just start chasing whatever the current trending topic is inside the gaming industry. I'm not going to do that. I want to have topics where I feel I have something to say and that I'm saying it because I think I have something to add to the overall discussion. Not just me being like, hey, everyone, here's what happened this week and here's my thoughts on it. Okay, let's move on. Like that. That's not me. That's not what I want to do. But thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching the video, for being here. And thank you so much to my patrons as well. You guys are the reason that I'm able to continue putting as much time and effort as I do into this YouTube channel and this series. So thank you all so much. If you're not a patron, please go check out my Patreon. It's at patreon.com/Devilore. You can get some details on all of the perks and such over there. You can also check out my merch store at devilore.com. And again, my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/Devilore, where if you're watching this video as it came out, I might very soon be streaming Plunderstorm on that channel. So come on over and say hey, check it out. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks again so much, everybody. I'll see you later.